We have about, just for those folks that are here to testify, about 20 folks have signed up to testify. I'd ask you to please keep your comments to, if you can. I know you've been waiting a long time. It's recognized, it's appreciated. We don't want to have to wait that long. Keep your comments to 3 minutes or less if you can. If you're going to reiterate what somebody said before, say, I agree with whoever came before me. We want to make certain we get your input. We know you're here, and we want to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to be able to speak. Like I said, there's at least 20 folks that have signed up, whether everybody's still here or not. We hope they still are. We're going to move along. I'm going to have 3 people come up at once. I may not recognize your name, so I'm going to do my best. First, we have Barry Schiller, Scott Wolf, and John Flaherty. So I knew those 3 names pretty easily. I don't see John. Oh, there he is. John. Barry John. Barry, you're up first. Welcome to Senate Finance. Then, as I indicated, if you can keep it to 3 minutes or less, that'd be appreciated. Over to you, Barry.
Thank you, committee, for hearing us. My name is Barry Schiller. I'm a lifetime motorist, bicyclist, and transit user. And I'm here because in order to meet our goals for climate, land use, equity, safety, and to keep our energy dollars in the state, more of the energy dollars in the state, I see 4 areas where I believe RIDOT has to do things differently. And I don't know that Director Alviti is someone who could do things differently, but no matter who is head of RIDOT, I think these things should be done differently. First of all, I think although we all want to see our roads and bridges fixed, I think we have to stop prioritizing discretionary funds used for highway capacity expansion, which I believe is what's happening. When you look at the big ticket items on 95, 146, 295, and other 37, other major roads, that's where the discretionary money is going. That means more driving over longer distances. It means more incentive for sprawl, which is energy intensive. That should change. Secondly, the flip side of that is discretionary funds should be used to implement those plans that you heard about, the transit master plan, for example. Transit is safer. When I was on the RIPTA board, I read that you have 28 times more likely to die in a car than on a transit bus per mile traveled. Transit supports compact, energy-efficient city and town centers. So that's what we need to emphasize, and it's not happening adequately, at least. The third point is that we really need to take bicycles seriously as transportation, for tourism, for public health, and when I was on the Transportation Advisory Committee for many, many years, I was the Sierra Club representative to that. I had to resign in 2014, medical issues, but I'm amazed that in the 9 years I've been off it, there's been almost no progress in our state bicycle plan. We still haven't gotten to downtown Woonsocket. We haven't gotten to downtown Pawtucket to connect. We haven't reached the beach in Narragansett. We haven't done anything on Aquidneck Island. And in 8 years, that really shouldn't be acceptable. The bridges in the East Bay have been gone for, out of commission for 3.5 years, a major thing like that. We should, and the RIDOT leadership even said, well, maybe we don't need to do that, they could divert to the roads. And then the towns in the area pushed back, and I know it's in the plans finally. But that shouldn't be acceptable. The fourth point is that some of these bad or slow decisions are happening because inadequate communication from the RIDOT leadership with public interest groups. I participated in quarterly DOT roundtables with the directors of the Carcieri, Almond and Chafee administrations. We had quarterly roundtables with environmental groups, community groups, transportation activists, and we hashed out concerns. But this was, for the last 8 years, this hasn't happened, and it should. It might have averted the fiasco of their ridiculous plan to break up Kennedy Plaza bus hub into confusing and scattered hubs that would have made the system harder to use and more confusing. And we had to spend our energy to get opponents and, from planners and the city council, environmental council, and others. And it's finally, the governor's office, I guess, intervened, and it's been dropped. But that shouldn't have happened because I think it happened because there was inadequate communication. Hey, folks, I'd rather be for things here than to speak against some of what's happening. But I want to conclude by saying, I don't think it's all bad at RIDOT. I think Mr. Alviti has done a good job of getting the bridges and roads under repair. I think they have a strong safety program. I admire him taking on the heavy truck industry to pay for some of the damage they've done. Maybe he got some bad legal advice, I don't know. But I admire him for doing that. And so it's not all bad, but I think we need to do better. And you people here in the legislature have to help, no matter who you pick to confirm at RIDOT, you have to help in that direction if we want to meet those goals. Thank you.
Barry, thank you very much. Scott Wolf? Scott, welcome to Senate Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and other members of the committee. Grossmont, Rhode Island focused on policy, not on personnel. We think that Rhode Island is facing an existential, not only climate crisis, but an existential housing crisis. And that both of those crises require a much more aggressive commitment to expanded transit, bike, and ped choices than we've seen under Director Alviti's leadership. And I think it's very important in looking at the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, that we follow the money and that we realize that I think most observers of that process would say that DOT has an outsized influence on the allocation of monies within that TIP, even if RIPTA formally has some say. I think that's an important point to make up front. And so despite some of the advances and investments that the director has mentioned, we do think that Rhode Island's transportation system is outdated and overly auto-centric, and that it has been failing in many ways to keep pace with the needs of our residents, our economy, and our planet. Now, I think along with everyone, would give the director accolades for the bridge repair program. I think that's been a major success. Oh, sorry. And credit is due there. But as we continue improving standard of repair, and again, I think the director's done some innovative work to improve our approach to standard of repair, we must also bring the state's transportation system fully into the 21st century and align its actions and investments with the goals and objectives of Rhode Island's bold and thoughtful long-range transportation plan, moving Rhode Island forward to 2040. So, what's needed in our view from Rhode Island's Department of Transportation? What would we like to see improvement and change? First, a better track record on non-auto transportation investments and projects. Barry already mentioned the I think, wasted energy and wasted time on the ill-conceived proposals to substitute a multi-hub for the Kennedy Plaza scenario. I think that it was very unfortunate that RIDOT scooped $37 million intended for active transportation I think if you look at realpolitik, it's not RIPTA's fault. RIPTA has a lot less of a voice in the construction of the tip than RIDOT does. So we think that there needs to be a commitment to mobility choices that expand access to jobs, that improve public health, that reduce climate emissions, and that close transportation equity disparities. And we believe that we need a DOT director who supports a more aggressive implementation of the TMP, as I've mentioned. According to RIPTA, fully implementing the TMP would achieve 80% of Rhode Island's climate action target for reducing vehicle miles traveled and related emissions as required by the Act. And then here's a statistic that I think is pretty new for Rhode Island, at least, that we working with Smart Growth America, were able to compile. This is not from Smart Growth America, though. It's from the Federal Transit Administration National Transit Database. Among the most heavily urbanized states in America, states such as Connecticut, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, and Massachusetts, we are well below all those states I just mentioned in per capita state funding of transit. We're at about $19, and those other states are at the lowest at $67, 3 times as much on a per capita basis, controlling for population. So these are some of the reasons why we, by the way, strongly oppose a recent proposal to have RIPTA folded into RIDOT. Another thing we think, and I'm getting close to the end.
If you could, Scott, please.
Wrap up, yeah. Another thing that we think is very important is a commitment to transparency and stakeholder public engagement. Now, there has been some discussion about good transparency on the RIPTA website as far as showing the public where projects stand and how much of the funds have been expended. But we think the more important kind of transparency is at the beginning of project decision making, tracking what's happening once a project has been begun and has been decided to be pursued. And then finally, we think it's important to have a commitment to multimodal transportation leadership for the 21st century. And by the way, I have no doubt that Director Alviti is competent. We have no dispute about that. But we think that the priorities are and especially at a time when there's a clear economic, environmental, and equity benefit to be gained from a stronger multimodal transportation system. So we believe that new leadership is warranted to achieve the critical goals of the TMP and the long-range transportation plan. We hope the committee will heed our call for new leadership at RIDOT, but I know how to count. I've been involved in politics. I think that's unlikely to happen, and if it doesn't, we still want to strive to work with RIDOT and continue to advocate for a direction that we believe will much better serve the long-term economic, environmental, and public health well-being of all Rhode Islanders. And let's measure RIDOT not so much by how it compares to the past, but how it measures up against dealing with the existential challenges of our future.
Scott, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for being here. John, over to you. Welcome to Senate Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to yield. I was here mainly to support Scott if there were any questions, as I've worked on this issue as well, so I know there's many other folks here, and the points that I was going to make, Scott has made.
John, well done. You listened well. Thank you. Thank you, John. Good seeing you. Next I want to bring up, I'm not going to, is it Patricia Robb, Peter Brassard, and Caitlin Gwen? Or Caitlin Genoa, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Peter?
Yes.
Or Patricia, rather. Patricia?
Patricia.
Patricia's here?
Is there a third person?
Peter, and is there, did I say that right? Caitlin? Jen? Okay, we'll go to the next. Gail Gifford? Patricia, over to you, and I ask, again, if you can keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And if somebody said something before, John was a great role model. Thank you, John. Over to you, Patricia.
I'm Patricia Robb, and I am co-chair.
Just make certain the button's red and the mic is close.
I'm Patricia Robb, co-chair of Rhode Island Transit Riders. I'm a Providence resident. I'm in my 70s and I take the bus most of the time. No one is disputing that RIDOT's record and progress on roads and bridges is exemplary. And we're all pleased that the bridges aren't going to fall down. But we are concerned that that RIDOT is focusing more on a kind of 20th century autocentric mindset when we really need a 21st century approach that utilizes all forms of transportation, not least buses, trains, and active transportation. And while it's certainly true that RIDOT is not responsible for RIPTA directly, it does have a lot to do with how the state's transportation funds are allocated, and in that regard, it does have a big impact upon RIPTA. And we don't feel that, despite what the director has said, that RIDOT is spending nearly enough effort and money on implementing the Transit Master Plan, the Bike Mobility Plan, and moving towards the Act on Climate goals. It was alarming, really, to hear the director's responses to Senator Zurrier's question about reaching our climate goals year by year. It doesn't look like, to me, that is going to happen without a whole lot more effort being put into it. And while it's absolutely true that you can't force people to take any particular form of transportation, you can certainly make it a lot more attractive to people. And I think we'd have many more people taking the bus, for example, if the buses came every 10 minutes near your house. And in many cases, that is part of the Transit Master Plan. We were also pleased to hear that the director did talk about assessing the impact of various projects according to the greenhouse gas emissions. We would have hoped that this was already in place, and we hope that every project will be assessed by those standards going forward. We are perhaps most concerned about the lack of public engagement on RIDOT's projects. While frequently RIDOT will tell the public afterwards what it is they're working on, as the representatives from Grossmart, Rhode Island pointed out, what you really need is to be involved with engagement early on, when you can still have an impact upon the direction of the project. All those things being said, we will continue to work to the best of our abilities with RIDOT, regardless who becomes the director of the program. But we think that it could be done more aggressively to move us into a 20th century climate friendly kind of state, should it be someone else. Thank you.
Patricia, thank you very much. Peter, welcome to Center Finders.
Thank you. My name is Peter Broussard, and I'm the chair of the Rhode Island Association of Railroad Passengers. I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. A lot of cross-outs. Director Alviti hasn't fully embraced the Act on Climate, and as has been said, his vision remains autocentric. Objections that we have are based on his actions over the last 8 years, and I'll only mention a few of them. I do agree with what Barry was saying about the highway widening projects, that they're detrimental at the expense of other modes. Director Alviti canceled, and this we also talked about, the longstanding quarterly meetings with transportation and environmental activists that have been going on for years. he canceled them, or the department canceled them, shortly after my organization and others provided letters of support for securing federal funding for the 610 project. So we were good for getting that done, and then he was done with us. Director Alviti failed to develop a viable plan, as was said, for the 2014 approved bond for the statewide mass transit hubs. The multi-hub plan would have really created a disconnected bus system and haphazardly linked the commuter rail system. Amendment 2, excuse me. In 2022, he also was mentioned, he forced autocentric projects into the STIP with the Amendment 2 limiting multi-use paths to only existing infrastructure related planning for a bikeway on Aquidneck Island's East Main Road. I live in Newport. Isn't scheduled to even be looked at until 2029, which is really outrageous. In 2019, he took, and this was talked about, transportation alternative program intended for safer biking and pedestrian access through a major amendment 19, diverting funds for vehicle infrastructure instead. Pawtucket Central Falls train station is a wonderful station. It was originally planned to use 4 passenger tracks, but it was value engineered to 2 Northeast Corridor mainline passenger tracks to reduce costs. It appears to us that the costs increased in part because of construction on the main line could only happen when trains were not running. The project was further value engineered, canceling the amenities building, which later Richter found replacement funding for. Connecticut DOT, as it was also mentioned, is currently conducting a study to potentially extend Shoreline East, I'm almost done, commuter rail to Rhode Island. A CONDOT representative at Groton public meeting last December said that Westerly was selected as the terminus through discussions with RIDOT. Limiting the study to end in Westerly demonstrates a short-sightedness and lack of vision for the state's mass transit that could be centered or should be centered on high-speed rail spine but with buses feeding into it. Widespread bus and train transit use, along with a bicycle and pedestrian focus, is the primary way the transportation sector can quickly achieve climate reduction goals. RIDOT, under Director Alviti, has shown tepid interest for the alternative transit modes as compared to automobile infrastructure. There needs to be more outreach with the environmental community, which, as I'm repeating, the RIDOT director must focus on the Act on Climate and both the TMP and the BMP. A dominant autocentric approach won't achieve climate goals. Again, or actually what I'd like to say, we oppose Peter Alviti's renomination, but I also can count. So we will work with him and would like to in the future.
Peter, thank you very much. Thank you for being here tonight. Next, Gail.
Great.
Welcome to Senate Finance.
Thank you. My name is Gail Gifford. I am a resident of Providence. I have a car, and I do use that. I'm also a pedestrian and a bicyclist, and a mom, and a small business owner. And I hope to be a grandparent, but at this point in time, I'm afraid to even have those conversations with my adult children because of the future that children are being brought into. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the UN Secretary General are screaming at us. The house is on fire, and we have virtually no time left. We are at the point where every decision that we make is a moral decision. It's a decision that requires courage, and that courage has to be used in favor of moving to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And transportation is one of the leading portions of greenhouse gases. Senator Zurier said in Rhode Island it's estimated at close to 40%. We need people who embody servant leadership. Part of that is, of course, serving. The other part is leading. We need leadership that will take us to places, visionary leadership, to take us where we never thought we could go. And we have to do it now. Not 10 years, not dribbling out money for alternative forms of transportation to cars, but to seeing that as the bedrock, that the goal is to get people out of their automobiles and into other kinds of transportation. So that leadership, we heard it tonight, that's not the leadership that was expressed. The leadership that was expressed was, oh, we need cultural change. Oh, we need consumers to be able to make choices at some point perhaps in the future. What we need is the infrastructure provided that enables the kind of dramatic change away from a car culture that's happened throughout Europe once the infrastructure was created to enable those cities throughout Europe to change, right? And people change, as Patricia said. So I'm asking you to think of this as an economic question for the state of Rhode Island. We are extremely vulnerable and already feeling the impacts of climate change, as you know. We are the fastest warming state in New England. We are subject to sea level rise. We have much infrastructure that will be underwater without changes. We need everybody doing their part, everybody making every decision in favor of the climate, in favor of mitigation, and we need leadership that expresses that. So I hope that you'll have the courage to do the right thing and think about what that visionary leadership needs to be. Thank you.
Gail, thank you very much. Thank you for coming to Senate Finance. Next, I want to bring up Peter Trafton, Valerie Reisbeck, and Cedric E. Again, I'd ask keep your comments to 3 minutes or less if possible. And if somebody said something before, just say I did. I say what John said.
It's going to be hard to beat John. Good evening, and thank you all for being here and for listening to my comments as well. Peter Trafton, I live just down the hill in Providence here, and I'm speaking for my grandkids and also for the Environment Council of Rhode Island. On February 1st, Governor McKee announced that the DOT, as we heard earlier, was Rhode Island's first state agency to reach 100% LED conversion. That's admirable, but it has nothing to do with transportation sector greenhouse gas emissions or with the other health threats posed by the emissions of our vehicles. Since 2016, the transportation emissions sector has risen in terms of percent of greenhouse gases, 9% since 2016. So that's not where we should be going. We should be following the lead of the Act on Climate and focusing on goals, setting goals, not just for emissions, but for a just transition where we listen to and serve the people's needs as expressed and help the people understand the value. We need to teach the value of making this transition and getting on to renewable energy instead. So I'm really trying to go back to the absolutely wonderful Act on Climate that you folks in the General Assembly should claim and take responsibility for. You birthed it. Let's keep it moving. To support the council's work, state agencies shall, and I'm reading sort of chapter and verse, and I hope you'll forgive me for this, and I'm only going to take a few selected things that came out in the Act on Climate, to develop short and long-term greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategies and track the process of those strategies. I would dream that those goals would be there from every agency, and that the website of the DOT would even mention something like this. We heard a lot of very interesting and rewarding plans earlier this afternoon, but I don't think that I've seen them before. It's nice to hear some new things, but we'd like to see tracking and results. Next goal, lead by example, purchase alternative vehicles that produce lower total emissions of greenhouse gases, and develop programs to encourage state employees, and others too, to reduce their vehicle miles and use sustainable transportation alternatives, including public transportation transit systems. One more, to support efforts to expand Rhode Island's green economy and develop green infrastructure, like highways, green infrastructure. Somebody said that, and it's been pretty well proven, I believe, that if you widen the roads, you get more cars, more emissions, more traffic jams. So widening doesn't work. Powers and duties of state agencies exercise their existing authority by addressing impacts on climate change shall be deemed to be within the powers, duties, and obligations of all state departments. So to the committee, I'd say, are you satisfied at the present with Rhode Island's Department of Transportation and its way that it's living up to the requirements of the Act on Climate? If you have any doubts, how can you and us, how can we work together with the DOT? I'd like to hear the leader of the DOT talk about being a member of the EC4, not working with the EC4. So we do it together. Thank you very much for listening to my comments.
Peter, thank you very much. Valerie,
Hi,
how do I say your last name, Valerie?
I'm Valerie Reischuk, and I am Senator Zurrier's constituent here in Providence. I'm a senior citizen, aging in place here in Providence, and I don't drive at all. I have a medical ID bracelet, but I had given up driving before that happened. The decisions of the Department of Transportation have a lot of impact on my life, even though I don't drive. And I have a lot of impact on Rhode Island as a non-driver. I'm the sponge in this watershed situation. I'm the sponge that absorbs the rainwater upstream so that I protect the coastal area from flooding, because I'm not emitting greenhouse gases, because I'm in public transportation and I'm walking. I'm protecting Rhode Island by not causing any additional traffic on our highways. And I know that sounds counterintuitive. It took me a while to wrap my brain around it. But because I'm not driving a car, there are fewer cars on the road. And I'm protecting Rhode Island. I hoped the DOT would take an interest in me. I moved here from another state to retire here, to spend my retirement years here. And I thought that I would be invested in as a valuable person in this society. And unfortunately, I face a lot of dangerous situations in Providence. The city of Providence has provided a lot of protection, protected bike lanes and protected areas for me to walk and really great crosswalks. They put one in on Gano Street just for me, because I go there to go to the grocery store. But when we ask DOT to fix North Main Street because Zachary Richardson lost his life there, we get responses that are not humane. I'm sorry to tell you that, but when we talk to DOT about pedestrian death, the answers we get back, one of the groups I belong to is Providence Street Coalition, the other one is Rhode Island Transit Riders. When we ask about the welfare of those of us who are the greenest travelers in the state, we don't get compassion, and we don't get that forward thinking that so many people have talked about here tonight. We don't get 21st century leadership. So the big ask I have of all of you tonight is nothing I wouldn't ask of myself. Ask Governor McKee to give us 21st century leadership. I asked him. He was on the campaign trail last year, and I asked him. And of course, he didn't like my question, to give us better leadership at RIDOT. But I'm saying to you, I already asked him, and now you can too.
Valerie, thank you very much. Cedric, welcome to Senate Finance.
Thank you for recognizing me. Good evening. My name is Cedric Yee. I'm a high school student who lives in the city of Providence, and I'm represented by Sam Zerio of Senate District 3. I walk to get around the state. I walk, cycle, and use public transportation as my primary methods because I am under the age of 16 and I cannot legally drive. As many other people have mentioned today, here, we need to, I'm sorry. So, as many people have mentioned here today, the 2030 Act on Climate states that we must reduce our emissions by 45% by 2030. This mandate is legally enforceable, and if the state of Rhode Island does not meet this mandate, it can and will result in a lawsuit. In addition, we're facing a severe public safety crisis. Pedestrian fatalities between 2019 and 2021 have increased by 37% in Rhode Island. And as mentioned 2 weeks ago, our neighbor Zachary Richardson was hit and killed by a driver on North Main Street, and Superior Court Judge Richard Litch was critically injured by a driver on Smith Street. Both streets are owned, maintained, and controlled by RIDOT. And tonight, Director Peter Alviti has expressed change for the future to address these. This is promising, but his record suggests that he is unlikely to follow through. In 2019, Peter Alviti attempted to rob $37 million out of the Transportation Alternative Program, which was specifically designed for alternative mobility, but was trying to be used for car infrastructure. As mentioned, in 2020, Alviti attempted to break up Kennedy Plaza for the benefit of rich property owners. In the Transit Master Plan and the Bicycle Mobility Plan have had no action since they were approved in 2020 by the state legislature. In 2021, Alviti tried to extort the city of Providence to rip out the nearly finished South Water Street urban trail, despite traffic studies that showed it would have little impact on traffic flow, and have since been shown to decrease crashes and injuries, particularly for vulnerable road users. That same year, Alviti borrowed $200 million in Garvey bonds to expand Interstate 95 and forced $748 million of car-centric infrastructure into the State Transportation Improvement Program through a minor amendment which excluded the public from giving feedback on it. RIDOT has also lied to the public about the greenhouse gas impacts on the road infrastructure projects, and later admitted that they actually had no methodology for actually measuring them, which meant it was impossible for Peter Alviti to actually ensure he was following the Act on Climate. And back in 2020, Mr. Alviti and RIDOT knew about the dumping of contaminated soil in the dense residential working-class Olneyville neighborhood as part of the 610 reconstruction project, and they let it happen under their watch. Then he intentionally lied and misled the public in statements and interviews in an attempt to cover up the illegal activity. Peter Alviti is a 1960s transportation director who is out of touch with what a 21st century Rhode Island wants and needs. In his term as director of RIDOT, Mr. Alviti has been in clear miscompliance of the Act on Climate, which is, again, legally binding state law and will result in serious consequences for the state if not met. I know that many of you are passionate about climate change and public health, and you were elected to your office because your constituents also care, but we will not achieve a 21st century transportation system for Rhode Island, and we will not meet our Act on Climate goals if Peter Alviti is reconfirmed as director of RIDOT. His history shows this, and we have little reason to believe that he will change. The Rhode Island of 2030 is the state that my generation will grow up to live, work, vote, and govern. We need a Rhode Island that is safe, sustainable, and equal. In 7 years, perhaps we will look at the legislators who sit in this room today, and we'll remember you as advocates of the unsustainable, broken status quo, whose problems that now we must fix. And this is what a lot of my generation believes today. However, perhaps today you will begin to act differently, and perhaps you will speak up and fight for what is right for the health, environment, and sustainability of Rhode Island, and we will recognize you as pioneers in the fight of climate change and stepping up as representation of what Rhode Island actually needs. Who do you want to be? We await your answer here tonight. Thank you very much.
Cedric, thank you very much for being here tonight. Next, we're going to bring up Seda. I'm not sure if I'm going to say that name right. Seda Sierra Adler. Did I say that right? Probably not. Okay. Matthew Schelling, I believe, and Kimberly Bogosian.
Mr. Schelling had to leave early.
Mr. Matthew had to leave?
Yes.
Thank you.
Send me his testimony. I don't know.
Well, he can have him send it to us in the mail. If you can use it, in a minute, you can see it. Is Kimberly Bogosian here? Not speaking, okay. And we have Christian Rosehard?
Roseland.
Welcome, Christian. And Alexander Nadion. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Okay. So first up is, if you can pronounce your...
Certainly.
by the way, just make sure the mic's on. The light should be red.
Yes, I believe so.
And I ask if you can, again, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. If you're going to say something else somebody said, you can refer to John Flaherty.
Absolutely. Hello, my name is Sean Sierra Petit. I'm a resident of Providence. I walk and bike to work most days and feel I have no choice but to drive to other places a little more often than I'd like to. For all the discussion about recreational trails and new bridges, we still have no bicycle or mobility accommodations on state-controlled roads here in the city, like Smith and North Main Street. I cycle both frequently, and I see neighbors in wheelchairs and mobility scooters or also on bikes having to roll in the automobile lane on both streets, a harrowing experience, especially on a day like today. The pedestrian crossings are dangerously short, almost always shared with turning vehicles, and have resulted in friends and neighbors being hit or injured and killed. When someone is hit, we maybe get a few more seconds of crossing time, but then it's still shared with turning vehicles by design. Even just the dedicated pedestrian crossing period after pressing a beg button and waiting a full traffic cycle is apparently too much to ask. Trying to traverse really any of the DOT-controlled streets or intersections in the city outside of a car is a hostile and dangerous task, and while it remains that way, and walking and rolling are not, as suggested earlier, equally viable transportation options. Sharrows, a bike rack, or a circuitous and bare minimum pedestrian combination is not sufficient. Thank you for your time, Chairman.
Sean, thank you very much. Next we have, is it Kristen Rochard?
Christian Roseland. Yes, thank
Welcome,
you.
Christian.
My name is Christian Roseland. Thank you, Chair DePalma, members of the committee, for having me here, allowing me to speak. I am a resident of Providence. My day job is a policy analyst in the solar and energy storage industries, and I've written about the economy-wide transition away from fossil fuels for the last 12 years. This included working at Rocky Mountain Institute, a global think tank, where we worked on exactly what needed to be done for the United States to reach the Paris Climate Agreement targets, which end up being very similar to our Act on Climate. It's a little bit more aggressive at the national level, but 45% by 2030 is also very aggressive and difficult to achieve. I think others have addressed the issues with the challenges of greenhouse gas emissions. Also, I have submitted written testimony. Also, there's an open letter in Uprise RI to all members of this council. I'm going to say that I testified against Peter Alviti 4 years ago. I am a former board member of the Rhode Island Bicycle Coalition. I have worked on trying to get better bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in this state. I do not think that it is an accident that despite all of the claims of good behavior and all of the promises that you have heard from Director Alviti, that all of the leading organizations in the state that speak for transit riders, cyclists, and pedestrians oppose his renomination, as do I. The Director Alviti that you heard present to you tonight, all of these great promises about reducing vehicle miles traveled that sounded like a champion of bicycle infrastructure, is very different than the Peter Alviti that we have worked with for the last 8 years. He's very different than the Peter Alviti that appears on Gene Valicenti's radio show to mock bicycle advocates. Let's talk a little bit about that 2022 greenhouse gas plan update that Mr. Alviti mentioned. There was language in there that falsely claimed that the bicycle mobility plan and transit master plan could not be acted upon. That was RIDOT section, and we believe that they authored it. It took a lot of work by advocates such as myself to get that language removed, but we still have no plan to seriously reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because that will require reducing vehicle miles traveled, and that is something that RIDOT has firmly refused to do. We have heard about a handful of bicycle projects that will be included as part of future plans. Where are the bike lanes? I'll tell you, I also live in the city of Providence, and there is zero bicycle infrastructure on any RIDOT-controlled road in the city, of which there are many. In fact, the bicycle infrastructure put up by the city of Providence frequently stops at a road or bridge controlled by RIDOT and continues on the other side. So we've heard a lot of promises, but what we ultimately have to do is we have to judge, if we're going to make a decision here about whether or not to reappoint Peter Alviti and whether to reconfirm him, we have to judge him on his record. And Peter Alviti's record on vehicle miles traveled and on non-car forms of transportation is abominable. It is extremely poor. Instead, what we have gotten is we've gotten $748 million crammed into the State Transportation Improvement Plan for auto-centric projects through a minor amendment, a total abuse of the process, to exclude public participation that featured practically no action. We've had 4 years of inaction on the bicycle mobility plan, a plan that I spent considerable time working on. We have had, I could continue, there's the attempt to rip out the South Water Street Urban Trail and to force the city of Providence to do that. That is not the action of a bicycle champion. That is not the action of a 21st century director of transportation. We need leadership for the 21st century to help us meet our Act on Climate goals. Director Alviti is not it. Personnel is policy, and particularly when we talk about a position as important as the Director of Transportation. So, I urge you, and I know that many of you will choose to reappoint Mr. Alviti, and I don't think that Senate President Ruggiero's presence here tonight is an accident. But I do urge you to act from your heart and to do what is right for the future of the state, for all of the children, and for the future of the planet. Thank you.
Christian, thank you very much. Next up, we have, folks, we'd like to continue the hearing, please. Next up, we have Alexander, how do I say your last name?
Nidich.
Sorry, Alexander, what's your?
Nidich, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, thank you. Welcome, Alexander.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the Senate Finance Committee, thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Alexander Nidich. I am a resident of Providence, and I'm here on behalf of Climate Action Rhode Island, or CARI for short. CARI is a grassroots group of over 3,000 members across our state with a mission to change the way our society creates and uses energy, focusing on the elimination of fossil fuel extraction and use, and the way we work together in anticipation of climate change. I've submitted written testimony detailing CARI's strong opposition to the reappointment of Mr. Alviti as director of RIDOT, and in the interest of time, I will not repeat the details of how the EC4 recently acknowledged that Rhode Island is not on track to meet its mandatory and legally binding goals under Act on Climate. We know our ability to meet the Act on Climate goals depends largely on transitioning to electric vehicles, reducing vehicle miles traveled through increasingly effective public transit, and safer, broader infrastructure for non-car transport. Under Director Alviti's leadership, RIDOT has largely deprioritized or openly opposed all of the above. As others tonight have already testified, and as I've included in the written testimony, there is no shortage of examples showing that RIDOT's vision under Director Alviti is not compatible with our Act on Climate mandate. I want to underscore that the numbers Mr. Alviti cited tonight only have meaning in context. The 55,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions is less than half of 1% of Rhode Island's yearly emissions. The 20 miles of new bike lanes and bike paths would be just a 15% increase in the paltry 140 miles of bike lanes under RIDOT's purview, and that number is dwarfed by the 3,300 miles of total roadway managed by RIDOT. On a personal note, I've lived on Main Street, Hope Street, and now live off Smith Street in Providence. A major factor these three streets have in common is their complete lack of bicycle infrastructure, despite having ample and often underutilized parking on both sides of the street. I've ridden my bike on these streets for years, and almost every time it's been a high-stress, occasionally terrifying experience. Now that I have a toddler, I simply cannot risk riding with him on these roads, and I'm forced to use my car, taking up even more parking and perpetuating the cycle of automobile dependency. The only place where I truly feel safe biking on Providence streets is on the South Water Street Urban Trail, something RIDOT recently fought tooth and nail to block. Under the right director, RIDOT could become a leader in truly addressing our state's largest source of emissions. Unfortunately, years of evidence show that Mr. Alviti is not the best choice. On behalf of Climate Action Rhode Island, I thank you for your attention.
Alexander, thank you very much. Next up, we have Randall Rose. We'll see Randall here. Timmons Roberts. Dylan Gless. Barry Freeman. And Michael Kearney. So first up is it Dylan?
Yeah, that's me.
Welcome, Dylan, to Senate Finance.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Chairman DePalma and the Senate Finance Committee for hearing me. My name is Dylan Giles. I'm from Pawtucket, and I'm here today to speak in opposition to the reconfirmation of Peter Alviti to be director of RIDOT. As someone who moves by foot, bike, and transit and doesn't own a car, I've become acutely aware of RIDOT's car-dominated transportation priorities. Under Alviti, RIDOT has allowed the bicycle mobility plan to languish despite trying to take credit for it here tonight. The projects that have been prioritized, which the director tried to take credit for again tonight, are largely recreational greenways and are not designed with transportation or equity in mind. The bike mobility plan provides a blueprint for a connected bike transit network to provide practical solutions for people to get where they need to go. These plans provide clear objectives that will help improve safety for those outside cars, help put Rhode Island on track to meet climate goals, and make transportation more equitable. Instead, Alviti has been hostile to the interests of every Rhode Islander who isn't moving inside a car. Transportation makes up 40% of Rhode Island's climate emissions, yet under his leadership, millions have been spent to expand highways, and RIDOT has repeatedly lied about these projects' ability to meaningfully reduce climate emissions. In 2021, Alviti led the push to halt the construction of the now successful South Water Street bike lane, a piece of infrastructure that I use regularly. In the fastest growing part of Rhode Island, of Providence, on former highway land, this simple piece of infrastructure is a model for how to make streets safer and more equitable for all. Alviti objected to the reconfiguration, saying South Water Street should only be used for transportation. A director who cannot grasp that bikes are a legitimate form of transportation has no business running a state transportation agency. The director just told this committee that people should not be dictated to on how they use the transportation system. But ultimately, given the last 8 years, it is clear that RIDOT and Peter Alviti's top priority is that people choose cars. Peter Alviti has shown nothing but contempt for those who travel outside of cars, and he is wholly unfit for this office. I urge the Senate Finance Committee to vote against reconfirming Peter Alviti as director of RIDOT. Thank you.
Dylan, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. While we've had many folks here from Providence, I'm glad to see one of my constituents here from the city of Newport. Barry, over to you. So she's come a long way.
Red light on, we're good. Thank you for having us here, for taking the time to hear the insights of community members regarding the reconfirmation of Peter Alviti. I'm actually here speaking in favor of our state's well-being and making progress together. So I put a little X in between the two columns. I'm Barry Freeman. I'm the executive director of the nonprofit advocacy organization Bike Newport. I'm a constituent of Senator DePalma's, based in Newport and contributing to improving and encouraging biking as a full-fledged mode of transportation statewide through all of our work. I've had the privilege of working with many of DOT's exemplary staff since 2012 and with Peter Alviti as their director since 2015. As I've shared with the director on many occasions, I wear 3 hats. I'm the director of a bicycle advocacy organization. I'm a member of the state's Transportation Advisory Committee, reviewing the state Transportation Improvement Plan, and I'm a partner with RIDOT to ensure the safety of all road users. I'm also one of the contributors to the statewide bike mobility plan, adopted in 2020, and is yet remarkably underutilized in planning. I did want to move away from my planned notes just to respond to some of the things that we heard tonight. One is just a caution when it comes to quantifying our transportation progress. We use a lot of numbers, and some of the numbers refer to the numbers of projects, and some of the numbers refer to numbers of miles of roadway, and I think that those are 2 areas where we have to be really careful. Because they can be misunderstood, because when we're comparing miles of paint and miles of bulldozer work, it's not the same. And we have to be careful of that. We still default to planning for cars first and then bike and ped, and we need to move into the realm of planning for the entire roadway and everybody uses it from the start. I did want to thank Director Alviti for bringing up the Ripple campaign, because we did see some major progress in, you know, as he said, getting to zero fatalities while that campaign was running. We'd like to see similar campaigns running. There was a campaign that started but didn't have any funding behind it called Rhode Island Waves, which got people to confirm one another literally by "do you see me? Yes, I see you," between pedestrians or bicyclists and people in cars. When that confirmation is made, people know that they're safe. When it's not made, people intuitively stop and don't enter the road. And if you take that to the next step, we avoid the fatalities, we avoid the crashes, we avoid the serious injuries. We need to elevate that campaign, and I hope that the state will put as much funding behind stopping pedestrian deaths by teaching people to do that two-way confirmation as we did with Ripple, and we can see just as much impact. And the last thing I wanted to comment on from comments we've heard is to recognize Valerie. She said something that I've been working on for a while, which is, how do we understand the value that people who choose to bike and choose to walk bring to our state? Valerie put herself in that position and explained, I'm doing these things and I'm myself making these reductions, having this impact. When we look at the comparisons between the money that we spend to save minutes in a car and the money that we don't spend to save hours on a bus, you know, dead stop, stop there. You know, there are people who spend far too much time in transit because we're not prioritizing improving our transit, and we are prioritizing people saving minutes on their single drive commutes in cars. Back to my script. I'm here to share with you work that can and must be done to meet our carbon reduction mandates by recognizing and investing in bicycles as full-fledged modes of transport, and by getting people on bicycles out of harm's way, by separating bicycles from vehicular traffic. As Chairman DePalma shared, DOT can get us there. There are several priorities that we're championing, along with other active transportation advocates, in the best interest of road users' safety and carbon reduction. We're asking Director Alviti to help us achieve these goals by committing to working together to expedite progress, specifically reinstating the quarterly roundtables for the director with community stakeholders, and prioritizing and accelerating implementation of the bicycle mobility plan, which features connected, and consistently safe separated bike routes statewide, not isolated segments. If they're not connected, people can't get from the beginning to the end. Each member of this committee has bicycle and pedestrian projects in your districts, in the past or currently. What projects need to be addressed to help your constituents get where they need to go safely? How many people are not able to use existing bicycle paths because they start and end suddenly without connecting to end destinations? I have the good fortune to have experienced innovative bicycle structure in some of the world's most advanced cities. And simply put, it's not that complicated, and it's not that expensive. The returns on these investments in community health and economy are incomparable to the lack of return on investments in widening highways. We invite Director Alviti to help us respond to the 60% of the population who would ride bikes if they felt safe, and who can contribute that much more to the health of our people, places, and economy through carbon reduction when we can bike and walk short and beautiful distances in Rhode Island. We hope that this next chapter for Director Alviti will include deeper partnership with active transportation and environment advocates and deeper commitment to carbon reduction solutions. I hope we will work together to make that progress.
Barry, thank you very much, and thanks again for coming from Newport. Michael,
Yeah, hi, thanks.
is it Michael Kearney?
That is me, yeah.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Try and keep your testimony to 3 minutes or less.
Thanks.
Bless you.
So my name is Michael. I live in Federal Hill. And as a lot of people have said today, Rhode Island was near the bottom for road conditions 8 years ago when Mr. Alviti took over, thanks to decades of mismanagement that are not at all his fault. And I'm glad that people in this legislature finally started addressing our bridges. But after nearly a decade and billions of dollars later, where we are today is a reflection of the financial and economic strategy at RIDOT over the last 8 years. We are still at the bottom for roads and bridges. We're in 49th place for roads according to the latest annual highway report. One of the contradictions of highway construction is that adding lanes only fixes congestion for a short while. Soon, people learn about the added capacity and then they shift their travel to go on this new road or these new lanes, congesting the roadway just as much or more than it was before the widening. This concept is called induced demand, and planners have known about it for decades. It's why cities with a lot of highways, like Los Angeles, have tons of traffic, even though they keep spending all this money on new lanes. The reality is that we cannot build a highway here in Rhode Island wide enough to eliminate congestion, because we would practically have to pave over the whole state, and then there would be nowhere worth driving to. So when we do build new lanes, the other thing is that that's just more vehicle miles that are causing wear and tear that this legislature and eventually the taxpayers are going to have to find funding for down the line. So forced with bridges still in disrepair and highways we already could not afford to maintain, this strategy should have been on the cost-effective safety repairs and promoting alternative modes of transportation that would reduce vehicle miles traveled. It is mind-boggling that instead of doing that, in the heart of Providence, which already has some of the most highway miles per capita in the entire country, RIDOT decided to widen 95 by 50% and bulk up projects like the 610 interchange at the protest of the city, instead of spending that money on more cost-effective repairs and shifting modes. And RIDOT couldn't even do these projects right. The new northbound to westbound ramp on the 610 is speed limited below highway speed, and the interchange itself is contaminated with toxic chemicals that they kicked up in Pawtucket. So when the maintenance for these projects comes due in another decade or so, God help us. If we want to reduce the soaring cost of ongoing road maintenance and meet our climate goals, we have to invest in non-car transportation. It sounds kind of silly, but because vehicles are so much heavier than people and bikes, the wear and tear that they have on roads is exponentially greater. So just as building more lanes, like I referenced, can induce more driving, building transit and bike facilities induces those modes and reduces wear and tear on roads that this legislature then has to maintain. Mr. Alviti said earlier that he's waiting for change on non-car transportation. That doesn't make sense. We can't wait for people to use bike lanes and transit that don't exist.
Folks, if we can please let him continue.
Thank you. Take it from me. I was able to ditch my car and now I use my e-bike and RIP to get around only because the city of Providence built quality bike facilities. Now I am one less car on the road causing expensive wear and tear that you have to pay for, and also one less car causing traffic when you all drive home today. So, Mr. Alviti said earlier how RIDOT was involved in securing a minimal amount of funding for active transportation and complete streets and influencing the intermodal transit at the Wickford Junction train station. I think that is a good start, like honestly. But what it does show is that RIDOT could have a huge impact on improving the state of transportation, both for highway users and non-drivers alike, in a cost-effective way if it wanted to, or rather if the director wanted to. The strategy at RIDOT over the last 8 years has made no sense, and Rhode Island cannot afford another 4 years of it. Our state needs someone who has a sound strategy to maintain our roads and improve our transportation facilities for people using all modes. Mr. Alviti simply does not have that strategy, and he has shown that over the last 8 years. I ask the members of this committee to vote no on confirming Mr. Alviti, and I encourage you to encourage the governor to appoint a new RIDOT director who will consider the environmental and economic sustainability of our state's transportation network.
Michael, thank you very much. Folks, if we could please keep it down, this is a Senate hearing. Next up, we'll have Haley Buckley, and certainly last but not least, Evan Moorman.
Hey, Evan.
Haley, how do you say your last name?
Bucky, like Buckley without the L.
Bucky without the L. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Also, if you can keep your testimony to 3 minutes or less, and if you want to reference John Flaherty, you can do that. So,
Okay. Can
over to
hear
you,
me?
Haley.
So thank you for your time tonight. I'll try to keep it brief. I have 2 main points that you may not have heard directly tonight. And first, I just want to say, my point is that RIDOT streets are hostile and discouraging to basic human activity, and that damages our health. And I want to emphasize, just in general, transportation directly affects individual and population health. So my first point, I'm just going to read to you from the hit and run report from when I got hit in October on a RIDOT road. This was on a street that I had already complained about and also submitted some positive, passionate ideas for improving its safety. So a couple excerpts from the hit and run report. It was determined that vehicle 1 was operating south on North Main Street. The pedestrian Haley Bucky was crossing North Main Street on foot in a westerly direction within a marked painted crosswalk. As Bucky was walking, she was struck on her right side by the front of vehicle number 1, sending her airborne. It doesn't even make me sad, it makes me mad. The vehicle sent me airborne, and I fell to the pavement. The pedestrian suffered injuries and was transported to Rhode Island Hospital on rescue. Vehicle number 1 is the hit and run vehicle. The driver and the vehicle left the crash scene. Sorry, it's weird to read it out loud.
Take your time. Take your time.
It's different than reading it to myself. So anyway, at the time of the investigation, the weather was clear, the road surface was dry, and the light condition was daylight.
Haley, if you can continue on, move beyond the accident, please.
Yeah.
This is a... So, we're going to... Please, we're having... This is the Senate Finance Committee. We're having the committee will speak. Haley, continue.
Yes, I only have one more sentence of that. The traffic control signal was operating properly prior to the crash, so I just want that. The point of that was I just wanted the RIDOT streets such as this one to be safer and more enjoyable and more encouraging. So my second item is more general and not personal. Is just to share with you a study that was published in Nature Medicine in November 2022 from Columbia University immunologist Ural and their team. So a couple little excerpts. They originally were thinking, you know, the power of the immune system in older adults is usually blamed on the aging process, but a new study from Columbia immunologists shows that decades of particulate air pollution also takes a toll. The study found that inhaled particles from environmental pollutants accumulate over decades inside immune cells in lymph nodes associated with the lung, eventually weakening the cell's ability to fight respiratory infections. So the point of that is that air pollution or particulate matter accumulates in our lung lymph nodes and stays there over decades of our life. The immune cells are simply choked, this is a quote, the immune cells are simply choked with particulates and could not perform their essential functions that help defend us against pathogens. The researchers said when we looked at people's lymph nodes, we were struck by how many of the nodes in the lung appeared black in color, while those in the GI tract and other areas of the body were typical beige color. And this is from autopsies in the research study. They were comparing the GI tract lymph nodes to lung lymph nodes, and the lung ones were black in color, and I can show you the picture if you'd like. So that's just my second point for why transportation is directly related to our individual health and also public health. That's all. Thank you.
Haley, thank you very much. Next, please. If I can, trying to have a Senate hearing, please. We'll keep the applause down. Thank you. Evan Moorsman, certainly last but not least. Evan, welcome to Senate Finance.
Thank you for having me. My name is Evan Moorman. I'm from Elmhurst off Pleasant Valley Parkway. I work in transportation planning, but I'm speaking as a citizen today in opposition to confirming Mr. Alviti. I won't repeat what a lot of people have said, but first of all, I heard some very troubling words in this discussion. Mr. Alviti used the word, transportation demand is fixed, and that in some senses it is just baked in with culture. That's more or less what we heard. That's just not true. In transportation, demand is a result of supply. People drive because it's easy. They drive too fast when we build wide roads. Mr. Alviti says he is an engineer. Almost all engineers now believe in induced demand. You build roads, you get drivers. You widen roads, you get fast drivers. You widen roads, you get more drivers, and you get people killed. You build bike and ped infrastructure, you do get people using them, period. If Mr. Alviti doesn't believe in induced demand, the closest thing we have to a law in transportation planning, that troubles me very much. I'm not exaggerating when I say in our field, it's as unusual as a doctor not believing in antibiotics. Places like the Netherlands, Montreal, Paris, Seattle, etc., show that people aren't different than us. I know my side often valorizes Europeans. They're the same people as us. They just have better infrastructure. They've been fighting for that better infrastructure for a long time. That's why they ride more, because it's safe, because it's comfortable. And also, there's a lack of attention to the basics, which hurts the poorest among us. I walk or bike almost every day to work. I get hit, I'm not exaggerating, I get almost hit 3 to 5 times a week. I've lived in Houston, Los Angeles, Toronto. I've never experienced a city like this. My wife wants to bike, but she is afraid to do so, as am I. And what does Mr. Alviti do? He tries to get the city to tear something up that was almost completed. To conclude, we just heard the word accident when describing a crash. This is a piece of infrastructure that is very predictable. It's usually not an accident. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Evan, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Senator Chacon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to take a point of personal privilege earlier, but for the people that are here.
Is your microphone on, Senator?
It's on.
Okay, thank you.
For the people that are in attendance tonight, the inference that the fact that Senator Ruggiero is here, and now you have Senator Pearson, who is the majority leader and the president, they sit in at almost every advice and consent. They didn't come in here tonight. And to say that the fact that they're here is going to affect the way we vote, most people know that Senator Ruggiero and I argue on a lot of points. And Senator Pearson also knows that. So I think that statement is totally irrelevant. He's here because he has a right to be here, and he sits in on every advice and consent of every director, every judge. So let's make that clear. He doesn't influence anyone here on how they vote. I've heard about previous governors and people meeting with them. I didn't hear any bike paths that came out from the previous governors. I didn't hear how the roads were fixed from the previous governors. I didn't hear bridges being fixed from the previous governors. I heard you met with them, okay? Kennedy Plaza, concerns about Kennedy Plaza. Is anyone aware of the 2 incidents that took place where people were injured down in Kennedy Plaza, employees, in the last month or so? And then we talk about, I'm not going to get into climate change because nobody brought up the airport, the number of flights that come in and out. But with that, I know Peter Alviti. He's lived in my neighborhood for years until he moved out. I think he has the ability to do a great job at DOT. And with that, I move his advice and consent.
Thank you, Senator. Is there a second to that nomination? Seconded by Senate President Ruggiero, Leader Pearson, Senator Brito, Senator Feelag, myself. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Director, welcome back and congratulations. Thank you. That will be moved on to the full Senate.